Okay. Bob is the Senior Vice President of Research and the Chief Analyst for Quantum Computing for Hyperion Research. His areas of expertise include analysis of advanced computing hardware, architectures, interconnect, and performance metrics for both classical and quantum systems. Before joining Hyperion Research, Bob worked for 30-plus years for the U.S. federal government as a senior science and technology analyst, covering global advanced computing developments to support senior-level U.S. policymakers, including those in the White House, Department of Defense, and Treasury. Bob has a BSEE from the University of Rochester and a master's from the George Washington University. So welcome, Bob, and welcome, everyone.
Thank you, Susan. Really appreciate the opportunity to chat today. And I want to thank all the participants for showing up on hopefully what's a delightful summer day where you are to spend an hour with us. And as Susan indicated, please, if you have questions and answers, there's a box that Zoom supports to make that happen. Otherwise, we'll just jump right into the discussion here. As Susan said, what we did was we conducted a study at the behest of D-Wave to explore the growing use of business process optimization using quantum computing. Now, I do want to make very clear that this study did not specifically target D-Wave or any of its product line, or even actually its name as we conducted the study. We treated this primarily as an independent exploration of what's going on in business process optimizations. The fact that it was funded by D-Wave is I thank them for that opportunity, but in no way was this either biased or tilted towards D-Wave agenda as much as it was really just exploring what's going on out there in business process going forward. So let's just kind of jump into the issue here. That's my picture in case you're interested in what I look like when I have a grown-up shirt on. So as we said, where the products here, this study was done in conjunction with D-Wave to better understand the challenges and opportunities experienced by commercial end users currently exploring or planning to explore generally for the next 12 to 18 months, opportunities of optimizing key processes of business using quantum computing. Now, for the purpose of the study, the efforts under consideration were those targeted to directly support an organization's capabilities to offer key revenue-generating products or services. So I want to make that very clear, because certainly when you have a nascent technology in the computing sector, such as quantum, some people's first thought is, oh, this is a research and development activity. This is what's going on in the scientific fields, down in the lab, down in the research department, where they're looking for innovation, new science, new technology discoveries. Here, the concentration was on the business-facing activities, which we'll get into defining later. But I wanted to make that very clear. This was not an R&D-centric exploration. It was much more about key business processes. And ultimately, the goal of the effort was to better understand status, variety, and span of business process optimization that we're using QC capabilities. And here, what we really wanted to do was make sure that we understood exactly what were the business processes, the considerations within the organizations, what were the challenges and opportunities they faced, and what were some of the organizational drivers that really got them involved in looking at quantum computing. So let me just give you an executive summary of the study we did. Right off the top, wide range of quantum computing-based optimization activities currently underway in the commercial sector across the 6 major countries that we surveyed, and we'll get into that in a little bit. Hybrid HPC enterprise HPC shops dominated the survey set, but HPC was present in almost all surveyed organizations. 60% were either mixed or primarily enterprise shops. 38% were HPC focused. So again, we didn't just focus on HPC in terms of research or HPC in terms of production, but when we said, okay, we want to target those organizations as well as enterprise organizations, what we found that most of the enterprise organizations that we reached identified or self-identified themselves as having some form of HPC capability. And this was based on a survey of about 303 commercial organizations. We actually had to reach out to about 695 potential respondents, basically going out to Fortune 1000 kind of organizations and saying, are you doing quantum work? And I find that number, that 43% completion rate, to be rather compelling, meaning that basically 40% of the organizations that we reached out to, I don't want to say at random, but at least organizations that we had no guarantee would be quantum savvy at this point, We got I think, a very, very impressive completion rate. Now, bottom line here was more than 1/5, 21%, have or plan to have within the next 12 to 18 months a production level use of quantum computing to address one or more of their important business processes. And that's a 50% increase in terms of production level interest compared with the results that we did back in a survey only 2 years ago. Leading areas currently under consideration in terms of business practices, finance-oriented optimization was a key selection opportunity for 17%, supply chain management 16%, and manufacturing factory processes 14%. All of these that were considered to be prime candidates for business process optimization using quantum computing. Now, the residents cited a broad range of business-related incentives for turning to QC-based optimizations. They want to enhance business processors' efficiencies, pretty self-evident. 20% said they were looking to increase revenues. 14% said they're looking to drive innovation. And that last number, that lower, that driving innovation, really speaks to the fact that this was a survey that looked at optimizing existing or planned business processes. Again, not focusing on the more speculative and perhaps more far-reaching opportunities that quantum computing presents for the scientific and engineering community. The greatest organizational driver that we found was potential performance improvement on key workloads. And this was strongly backed by influence from both technical staff and senior management. When we found that organizations were actively involved in quantum computing optimization, what we found that they're really focusing in on the key workloads. They've identified where their greatest problems are, or the opportunities for the greatest success, but they also had strong backing by both the technical staff within the IT sector, as well as the development community and senior management. Two critical ingredients we think are really important if you want to think about bringing quantum computing into your overall business process yourself. There was not much enthusiasm for new QC-based applications, and this kind of some sense speaks to the near-term potential for optimization in business processes. People are saying, what's out there right now? The kinds of optimization opportunities we have are perfectly acceptable to us and perfectly manageable within our vision. So we're not looking for new speculative kinds of applications coming down the road. We see what's available today, and we see how we can take advantage of it. And this, of course, fits the theme of business process first, research and innovation second. We want to highlight, and also they wanted to highlight the pragmatic expectations for the technology. What this really does is it says, we want to get started today. We're not willing to wait for quantum advantage, quantum superiority, the million qubit error corrected gate array system. We want to get going on the technology today because the promise we see as being viable in the current tense. There's lots of optimistic financial prospects for this optimization prospect. We found the most common expectation was a long-term annual commitment. And I'll define long-term as not when you're standing up an activity, but within an organization where you're now at steady state. You have an existing quantum computing optimization process in place, and the long-term commitment to that was about $3 to $6 million annually to support that activity. Now, what we found is that the expectation of return on investment, which we define as a combination of factors, including greater operational efficiencies, lower operating costs, increased revenues, the expectations on that $3 to $6 million was about an annual return of about $60 to $65 million. And we'll get into how we reach that number shortly. But really what that does is it leads to a return on investment of some sort of between 10 and 20 to 1, which is actually a relatively interesting and compelling return on investment from where I sit. So we were really happy to see the expectations of what quantum can bring to the table from these organizations. Really, when we had the expectations of the 290 companies, remember we talked to 303, 290 responded to these particular questions. This represents an estimated total revenue increase of almost $52 billion annually for the 290 companies that we talked to. Now, if you integrate that over all the companies we didn't talk to, this is a significant return on investment estimate for what efficiency or optimizing business processes in quantum computing can bring to a wide range of industrial commercial sectors. We found that most organizations plan to move forward with one or more of their current QC-based optimization projects. In fact, what we found, and we didn't want to say, let's only talk about your most important activity, because we didn't want to pigeonhole anyone into selecting their most important, or in some sense, overlooking the depth and breadth of ongoing projects. So we said, let's talk about, in some cases, all of the projects, the activities you have going on. And what we found that respondents organizations are looking at about an average of 3.7 different optimization options, different places within the company. They're at different stages of development, proof of concept, early exploration, production level, fully funded research activities and such. But there are lots of different activities going on within a typical company, meaning that there's lots of exploration, lots of different ways that quantum can be seen as being useful in terms of optimizing business process. For this effort, euro and pound conversions were used depending on country of respondent, but we'll present them all in US dollars. As I said, we did talk to 6 different countries. We asked the questions using the local currency, whether it be pounds, euro, or such, but converted to dollars for the sake of this. Unfortunately, not this US-centric presentation. So let's really just dive right into some of the demographics. This is kind of a proof of concept, so you can believe, okay, we want to hear what they have to say, but we want to know who they're saying it before we get there. As we said, 303 respondents, spanning 6 major QC adopter nations: US, about half, Germany 15%, France 12%, UK, Italy, and Spain. We basically had 10 target industries, and this is the list on the left. We wanted to go to industrial sectors that we thought would have some real practical interest in optimization: automotive, chemicals, finance, healthcare, insurance, manufacturing, oil and gas, retail, commerce, software and internet, and telecommunications. So those were our 10 target sectors. And you see on the right there that our target industries were a significant portion of the number of organizations we hit. Our non-target organizations were everybody else, and I'll get to that list in a little bit. But as you can see here, we had a very good representation of these 10 target industries going forward. And when we asked, this is a little histogram, if you will, of the business developer's main line of business, kind of breaking down that previous graphic that showed our target industries and some of the other ones that there. And you can see that we cast a wide net across 18 different verticals. Software and internet companies were the largest group of respondents. Finance or financial services placed second. And others identified primarily as things like, we're an IT firm, we're an information technology firm, we're an engineering firm. But the key here is not to drill down on the specific organizations we talk to, as much as it is to look at the depth and breadth of organizations that said we're involved in quantum computing. This is not limited to finance, as some people tend to think when they think of quantum. It's not limited to specific manufacturing, healthcare, any specific vertical that you could think of. It really had some degree of interest across a wide range of organizations that we talk to. And again, what we do is we want to start out with probably the most important question: what's your level of interest? Or excuse me, what is high interest within the enterprise was the answer here. But you can see the different compositions of how these organizations self-identified. Only a small percentage said that they were primarily a high-performance computing sector, 16%. Some of them, 22%, about 1 in 4 to 1 in 5. So they're a production environment, but the bulk were mixed high-performance computing and enterprise environments. There was a smaller percentage of primarily enterprise shops with some HPC, but only 3% that comes out to a very small percentage, I think 9 or 10 organizations that said that they were an enterprise shop with no HPC. And so what that really means is that having HPC doesn't necessarily mean that you're a quantum computing company, but it means that if you're interested in quantum computing, you probably have some HPC going forward, something just to think about as you position yourself and your questions in terms of what the quantum computing optimization process can bring to your business processes. We asked the primary question is, how important is QC-based optimization to optimizing key business processes? As you can see here, 71% of the overall organization said it was very important. 36% it was somewhat important. That gives you a number about 97%. Only 1% saw it as too early to tell. That low number actually blew me away, because in a lot of organizations that we talk to, there is a certain amount of wait and see in quantum computing. And I think that skews heavily towards the research and engineering potential end users. Those are the organizations that are still waiting for increased qubit counts, greater gate fidelity, algorithmic maturity, and such. Where here in the optimization world, everyone said, yeah, we have already made the decision to really pull the trigger on quantum, make it something we're interested in. The current technology today is appropriate to our mission requirements. So the fact that only 1% of the organization said too early to tell, I thought was really interesting. In fact, 70% of US-based respondents saw QC as very important, the highest of any surveyed country. 43% of counterparts saw it as very important. That was the lowest very important country, but when you jump to somewhat important, the Germany jumped way out to the front. Let's jump a little bit now into QC-based optimization targets and drivers. When we asked about what was your most important business process appropriate for QC-based optimization, certainly ongoing or starting within the next 12 months, finance-oriented optimization, supply chain management, and manufacturing factory processes were the most selected option. Interesting enough, the UK had 0 responses for manufacturing and factory, but they had the highest interest in financing of any group. Germany, again, it wasn't a great surprise there. They're a powerhouse when it comes to advanced manufacturing. They had the highest interest of surveyed companies in manufacturing and factory processes, as well as workflow scheduling. But again, there was a wide range of most important. So here, respondents could only select one choice going forward. And again, lots of different respondents had lots of different opportunities to key in on different options as their most important one. And again, the depth and breadth of the selection here really speaks to the general perception that a business process is optimized with quantum computing has wide applicability across a number of verticals. The most important business processes appropriate for quantum computing, and here respondents could select all that apply. So really what we have here is supply chain management, workflow schedules, manufacturing processes, finance-oriented optimization, maintenance planning, an interesting one, the idea of keeping track of all the requirements for maintenance, when things need to be stood up and set down for maintenance, how often you should do it, how you should move materials and products to make that happen seamlessly. The key here, I think, is interesting, is that when we said respondents could select all options to apply, not just the most important, again, this is where we got that 3.7 activities per respondent. And you can see here that nothing really takes a leadership position as much as they all tend to go between 1/3 and 45% in terms of this is one of our top business priorities or within our group of top 4 different activities. Again, the depth and breadth here, I think, is the current takeaway. When we asked about the state of their most important QC-related activity, again, this you could only select one here. In other words, you take your most important optimization activity currently being conducted or planned within the next 12, 18 months. And what we saw there was quantum use case analysis and prioritization. In other words, organizations have committed to exploring the potential of quantum for some of their most compelling use cases, the first necessary step in some sense to really understanding how you can introduce quantum optimization into your overall business processes. The one that got me most important, I think, was the production use of quantum computing. As I said earlier, about 21%, double what we saw in 2022. And my general sense here, based on discussions with some of these organizations recently, is that production jobs right now are probably cloud-based and don't require significant quantum computing cycles as yet. Here at Hyperion Research, we are very, very positive on the fact that quantum computing, which is now primarily a cloud computing-based activity, will start to increase on-prem procurements. I know that D-Wave itself actually announced one of their a major procurement going down to Huntsville, Alabama, at the Qubits conference that I first presented this study at. Lots of organizations right now, I think, once they start to kick the tires on quantum, once they start to depend on it in a production level environment, they are going to judge both the technological and economic advantages of balancing their quantum computing requirements between cloud when necessary and between on-prem when necessary. So I think we're going to start to see more and more production jobs moving off the cloud into on-prem capabilities going forward. Now, when we asked about QC-related activities where you could select all, again, here we have a wide range of activities going on, about 2.6 selected per respondent. Again, this was all the opportunities going forward. So you can see that there are a number of different projects going on at different stages of development. This makes perfect sense. It's a rapidly changing nascent technology. The dust really hasn't settled yet. Lots and lots of exploration going on. And one of the things that this speaks to me quite clearly is that organizations are probably grappling with expertise. Do they have sufficient expertise to make the right decisions? Can they turn to the right vendors to offer the right solutions? And how does one go about, perhaps most importantly, we'll get to this in a little bit, and most importantly, how does one bring quantum computing capability into their existing computational workloads and do that hopefully in a relatively seamless manner that doesn't require significant upheaval in hardware and perhaps more importantly, significant upheaval in software, particularly things that are end user facing, where you don't want to have to go out and train significant subject matter experts or end users within your organization how to actually deal with quantum computing. You want them to basically be able to click and go, optimize the process, and be done with it. When we asked about the most important business process, business driver for the most important process, again, as I said in the executive summary, enhancing business processes, increasing revenue, driving innovation were considered to be very, very important going forward. Things like improving research capability, you see very low number, reducing time to market and not an issue. Realizing cost savings, interestingly enough, was not a specific target as much as enhancing business processes and increasing revenue. So I think there, we're not looking at efficiency for the sake of lowering cost, but efficiency to make processes more effective going forward with the, I think ultimately the assumption that that's going to generate either cost savings or perhaps more importantly, achieving competitive advantage, increasing in revenues and such. The business processes, when we asked about what were some of the most important business drivers, this is again the collection of, so organizations could, or respondents could pick any number of choices here, 3.4 drivers chosen for respondent. We see basically the same kinds of activities, but again, this idea that if you can pick increasing revenue as one of the most important, not the most important, it does kind of bubble up to the top, although not in a terribly statistically valid way. So again, there's lots and lots of expectations here about the business drivers of what people think quantum optimization can bring to your ultimate business processes. When we asked about things like the organizational drivers, what are some of the things that you see from an organization versus a business process? Performance improvements on workloads, strong internal, you need strong internal influence from the technical staff I mentioned earlier, strong internal influence from upper level management. Those are the internal drivers that are going to bring quantum to the fore, that are going to say, this is something we need to do. And so I think that's, again, strong influence from business staff was mentioned as well. Traditional early adopter attitude, very few people saw that as a main driver. I think the idea of early adopters right now, folks who kind of jump in just because it's a new, bright, shiny object, I think we've moved well past that particular phenomena in quantum. And we're getting down to kind of the nuts and bolts of what the financial returns on investment are. It's not just, let's get something new out there. It's now we understand some of the financial calculations, some of the risk assessments we can do, and it's worth our effort to do that. So we're moving away from early adopter into some of the more hard-nosed business analysis that justifies some of this enthusiasm for QC-based business optimization. Let's dive a little bit into the status of what's going on in some of these optimization efforts. We asked a little bit about what was the start date of your most important optimization effort? In other words, how long have you been doing stuff? And what we see here is that most important efforts have been active for about the last 6 to 18 months. And there's going to be another percentage who are looking, who have been actually conducting these activities for 2 years or more. Basically what that implies that 85% of most important efforts are already well underway in some form. That may not mean production level. That still may mean exploration. That still may be a fully funded R&D project or something along those lines. But what it means is that the most important efforts right now are underway at 80%, 85% of the organizations that we spoke to. Now, what I find interesting is if you just look at this chart, you can see that there appears to be a fall off going forward. The numbers, because if you look at, say, the last 12 months to 6 months, 18 months to 12 months and such, 20% of the organizations that we spoke to within those 6 months intervals jumped into the quantum computing realm within the last year and a half. Going forward, those numbers decline somewhat dramatically, in some sense almost by 60 or 70%. I think what that really means is that the most important optimization effort is already underway in many of these organizations. And it's not that they're ceasing to explore what's going on, but they are probably turning to second tier optimization opportunities here as well. So I think if we ask this question going forward about how do you plan to address some of your secondary or at least non-most important optimizations going forward, are you going to carry over the successes, the challenges, the opportunities that were experienced in your most important activity that you've already completed and bring that to the fore in some of your follow-on activities? And I think that really explains why we see the fall off here and why I think we're going to see increased interest in this as more and more organizations bring quantum computing business processes to more and more of their business processes. So when we asked a little bit about hardware support, and I kind of spoiler alerted this a little bit, cloud access provided through a service provider is really the highest percentage right now. Direct cloud access provided, and the cloud service providers, of course, would be organizations like AWS, Google, or Microsoft. Direct access support supplied, provided by the hardware supplier, which is what you're going to get from an organization like D-Wave or Rigetti or IBM. Not that those organizations don't have opportunities to go in through a CSP, but they also have very direct support that you can log on to their particular environment, from something as trivial as a free trial to a pay-as-you-go to a rather expensive multi-million-dollar consulting professional service contract that gives you soups to nuts application, all the hardware access that you really can justify and such. Again, this on-premise quantum computing number, 18%, I think that's a low number now. I don't believe that 18% of on-prem, that quantum computing activity right now is on-prem. I think that we've only really started to see interesting shipments going forward. So we're kind of scratching our head about why that number was actually that high. But again, cloud access through a third-party quantum computing access curator, such as a company like Strangeworks or Zapata, also another intermediary that's helped addressing some of the lack of in-house expertise when it comes to some of these quantum computing early adopters. They really are interested in making sure that they're talking to organizations that can help them identify the quantum computing business cases most applicable to optimization processes and make that happen within their organizations. We asked a little bit about classic hardware support. Quantum computing doesn't exist in a vacuum, and so it does need a certain amount of hardware support on the classical side to make that all work. And really all we just wanted to do here was say things like, how much hardware support do you envision using or committing to support your most important QC-based optimization effort? And here we just basically said, what do you see in terms of on-prem classical support? There the number was about 64 to 256 nodes for on-prem systems, and on cloud-based instances running less than 1 hour. So for organizations that are either running some kind of loosely based hybrid quantum classical algorithms or just some interface to support the quantum computing systems using something outside the quantum system to perhaps manage traffic, workflow, data, IO, and such, the target numbers there were 264 to 256 nodes and cloud-based instances. So again, not a terribly onerous base of classical hardware that adds to the overall cost and complexity of implementing some of these QC optimization activities. Now, when we asked about the greatest hurdle to QC-based optimization, you'll see here, this is kind of the story of the day. And this is something we see all the time when we ask about what are some of the concerns when you have a new technology, advanced computing technology, you want to bring into your workload capabilities. And invariably, it's complexity with integrating into our existing workloads. We've seen this over time with classical HPC, the basically invention or proliferation, if you will, of GPUs, what's going on right now in things like AI, particularly generative AI and large language models, and now QC. Complexity with integrating into the existing infrastructure is probably the concern, followed up, of course, by its logical counterpart, lack of in-house quantum computing capability. Organizations are interested in quantum, but they feel, I think appropriately so, that they lack the in-house capability. And the biggest problem they have is gaining skills in that set, hiring the right people, and in some sense, they're going to be turning to the vendors and some of the professional support organizations to really help make that process go more smoothly. Because I think a lot of these organizations don't want to really have to beef up their in-house quantum computing staff. They just want to make sure that it's driven into their existing capabilities and it becomes somewhat of a rather dull black box in terms of their overall performance requirements. Then there's all sorts of other other issues here that decrease, slow progress in demonstrated performance gains in quantum, limited quantum computing options. There's a resistance and skepticism from some of the existing IT infrastructures going forward. Unproven performance advantages, lack of available funding, money is always a problem, lack of demonstrated use cases. The list does go on and on. But the bottom line here, which I think is most interesting, is no one said a hurdle was that they have no requirements for new compute capability. No one said, why should we go to quantum? We are perfectly content with our existing computational capability. That number is vanishingly low, about 8% of the organizations. And quite frankly, I've never met anyone in certainly the HPC world that said, no, I have enough cycles. So what this really means to me is the fact that that is not considered a hurdle means that the other 92% of the organizations, at least in passing, have indicated to some extent that they have, in some sense, unmet computational requirements that they think QC can help fulfill. And that to me speaks again to the potential opportunities for quantum to fill a lot of gap, expensive, complex, high performance compute requirements that we see increasingly in the overall traditional advanced computing world to deliver performance. And so I think quantum is perfectly positioned at this point in time to step into what a lot of people are thinking is an advanced computing HPC, even enterprise environment that is becoming more costly, more complicated, and just not demonstrating the kind of performance gains that the sector has come to rely on for over the last 40 or 50 years. Let's talk a little bit about budgetary perspectives that we asked our respondents about. And when we asked them about their near-term budget expectations over the next 12 months, in other words, this is what they're planning on doing now during all of these different phases that we talked about earlier. This is not that steady state environment that I mentioned, which is once you have things up and running. So look at this more as the kind of experimental stage. And basically, if you look at some of these numbers, about 1 in 5 said they're going to spend more than 5 million, but 1 to 1.5 million was the most chosen opportunity, most chosen option here, which really makes sense when you think about all the exploration. And as I said earlier, some of the commitment to cloud-based, which is much more flexible, much more pay-as-you-go. No one is really committing, in some sense, to any great on-prem procurements, except for the fact that about 1 in 9 said they were going to spend more than 7.5 million going forward in the next 12 months, which again speaks, I think, a little bit to some of the promise or some of the potential of some of the on-prem procurement, or at least in some case, some significant activity within cloud service offerings for quantum computing support. Now, I just want to point out that this budget includes both QC sector revenues. In other words, some of the money that will be spent to the supplier base, whether it be hardware, software, full stack professional services, but it also includes in-house expenditures to support QC-based optimization program. So this is your commitment of in-house hardware. This that's non-quantum based traditional stuff. This is your commitment to personnel, additional resources. If you have to set up a smaller compute center, some kind of facility to support the quantum capability. So this doesn't speak to the actual quantum computing market as much as it speaks to the budgetary requirements of the organizations that are walking down the road to bring quantum computing optimization processes in-house. Now, when we asked about the steady state budget commitments, this again is that, okay, we've reached the stage now where we're no longer experimenting. We have a fully functioning, effective quantum computing process. Here, how much do you think the budgetary commitment will be? 1/3 expect a total budgetary commitment between $1 and $7 million per year. 1/4 expect to spend over $10 million a year annually on quantum computing for business optimization processes going forward. And 50% expect to spend $25 million or more if they're in the US respondents. And again, there's no data on proportional QC market revenue versus in-house commitment, even though I suspect with these large numbers and especially the increases and the fact that most organizations aren't going to be interested in significantly bolstering their in-house capabilities, that these numbers really reflect much more what's going to be the kind of quantum computing revenue base from an end user facing perspective as opposed to in-house. So really what we're looking at here is a relatively robust sector when it comes to the kinds of procurements that will be reached, say, within the next 2 to 3, maybe 4 years in terms of steady state quantum computing optimization within the organizations we surveyed. Now, this boils down to what I mentioned earlier, that expected return on investment, if you will. And again, we define that as greater operational efficiencies, increased revenue when applicable, increased competitive advantage, cost savings, all that goodness that we talked about earlier in terms of what goes into a value added of a quantum computing capability. And one half expect between 10 and $100 million of this ROI for those reasons. And one third expect $100 million or more. And this was on an annual basis. This wasn't a one-time shot integrated over multiple years or decades. This is what organizations expect to reap in terms of return on investment coming out over the next, say 2 to 3 years as the market reaches steady state. Well, this, as I said earlier, this represents an estimated total revenue increase annually of almost $52 billion for the 290 companies that responded to this question. Again, a relatively significant number in terms of annual savings or annual return on investment just by optimizing existing critical business processes within these organizations. Now, take a deep breath on this chart, because what I tried to do was map the relationship between the expected annual budget spent on QC-based optimizations, and that would be the x-axis, which we talked about 2 slides below, and map that against the y-axis, which is expected annual resulting revenues. And all this chart is the heights show you the different organizations. For example, if you look at the $6.25 million line on the x-axis and trace that up, the average there goes to about $62.5 million on expected return on investment. And the different colors show you the height of the organizations that populated that particular cross-referencing, if you will. And so really what you see here is that the most chosen option, that high orange region chosen by about 10 to 15%, 10 to 15% of the organizations, 10 to 15 of the percent of the organizations, yes, centers on about $3.6 million with a resulting revenue about 60 to 65 million. And you can eyeball these numbers. If you're not completely thrilled with how I nail those down, you can convince yourself that you have a different way of interpreting the data. But I think this is an interesting way to talk about this. And this really is what led to this ROI approximation of 10/20 to 1. Now, I have to point out that 1 out of 10 respondents foresaw annual revenues optimization budgets to exceed 27 million, while expecting annual ROIs between 376 million to over 1 billion. And that's that little green blip that you see at the top right of the screen. There was some significant optimism when it comes to what's going on in terms of quantum. And the key there is, of course, you have to spend a reasonable amount of money to get there, $35 million a year annually, but your payoffs can exceed $1 billion or more. That's some of the expectations we had here. So again, and then you can look at some of the other issues here in terms of optimism. Organizations that spend perhaps more than $12 million per year, no one felt that they had any activity that was going to return less than, say, 17.5 million, an ROI of 2 or 3, nothing that terribly bad, but still no organizations felt that that was going to be within their particular return on investment expectations. So let's really talk about one of the questions that you can't ignore, the enthusiasm right now in terms of what's going on with AI, generative AI and such. So we would have been remiss if we didn't ask about quantum computing and AI. Will they be able to combine forces on optimization efforts? And I think it was pretty clear that we expected most respondents to see the confluence of QC and AI as a promising solution to some of their computational problems. Some organizations, 39%, already have pilot programs in place to address that. Others have full production activities, about a third already in place. But what's interesting here is it's difficult at this time to pin down the exact AI value added to this process, or what type of AI is being considered here. Is it machine learning? Is it deep learning? Is it generative large language model kinds of activities? So this is a question that probably deserves some further study. I think where the problem here is that we're combining 2 relatively recent and nascent technologies, which adds a little bit more uncertainty to the answers, but it definitely shows that there's a lot of interest right now in joining some of these two technologies. And really what this does, this speaks to me, is again, it goes back to that question of 92% of organizations having unmet computational problems, and they're looking for answers. They're looking for new solutions. The time is really ripe for some of these nascent technologies, whether it be quantum, whether it be AI, or whether it be a combination of both, to step forward and start to address some of the problems that traditional enterprise or HPC compute capabilities are not capable of addressing to the full satisfaction of these organizations. So something to look forward to going forward. And when we asked about, okay, let's wrap this up. You've answered all your questions, folks. Let's talk a little bit about going forward. And what we found here is that about 37% plan to aggressively move forward. About 62% move forward with quantum computing, but at a measured pace with modest budgetary increases. So we're kind of thinking a little bit about this. What does that mean in terms of overall commitment to the technology? Certainly, some percentage said they may actually be reduced some of their production activity. We're trying to figure out what this really means. Is it that not all projects were deemed appropriate for continued commitment? If you're going to study 4 or 5 different opportunities, maybe only 1 or 2 are going to be justifiable from a technology and cost perspective. So this may be nothing more than a reaction to a fine-tuning process. Initial wave of enthusiasm, initial wave of let's look at every process that we have that we can think of. And now we're getting more down to brass tacks when it comes to really nosediving in on what's important. It could be, and this is one of my favorite explanations, lack of in-house expertise to address range of particular activities. There's only so many smart people within an organization right now that can probably look at how to drive quantum computing processes into across an overall business activity span. And so again, the lack of expertise in-house puts much more of a burden on quantum computing suppliers, professional services, some of those CSP folks we talked about, and some of the curators of quantum computing software that we talked about. They need to get involved to do, for lack of a better term, a little more hand-holding, a little more support. Enterprise and HPC legacy systems have been around for 40, 50 years. You can find people to do that. There's not a lot of quantum computing history, not a lot of quantum computing legacy. And I think that's why we're going to start to see certain issues start to become stressed if there isn't the capabilities to really easily and painlessly drive quantum computing optimization into some of these organizations that don't require significant upheaval, significant in-house expertise, or significant complexities in integrating that into an existing computational workload. So summary and some closing thoughts. I mean, it should be pretty clear that a wide base of commercial organizations are exploring the potential of performance gains, financial advantages. This study concentrated on mixed enterprise HPC environments, the kind of sites that many do not associate with aggressive adoption of nascent and rapidly emerging technologies, making the results here more compelling. These organizations are primary enterprise looking business process organizations that generally don't go out and grab every bright shiny object that goes forward in computing. And I think that, as I said, I think that that's an interesting point to notice here, especially when we go back to that 43% acceptance rate on the initial survey. The study highlights commercial organizations are convinced quantum can accelerate business processes and are committing significant funds to do so. Bottom line here is the overall quantum computing sector can only benefit from being able to offer improved capabilities for commercial-oriented optimization processes, especially when it comes to that expertise issue that I keep hammering home. Again, commercial end users will be carefully looking for support to address their hurdles, such as complexities with integrating capabilities, hardware, software, from a hardware and software perspective, navigating in-house and end user experiences, making sure that your end users don't have to be quantum ready, just quantum users. Unclear vendor selection criteria is something that right now is a certain amount of confusion there. Organizations need to really identify what's going on out there. I cringe nowadays in the quantum computing sector when organizations tout certain performance metrics that mean almost nothing to the average potential quantum computing user. What's my qubit modality compared to yours? Why aren't you doing neutral atoms instead of superconducting qubits? Look at my new qubit count this year. Those things tend to confuse users. What I like to see, and I think certainly what end users want to see in this situation, is more about what does this mean for a particular process? How much more efficiency can I get out? How much more work can I do? How much more money can I save? Those are the kind of metrics that matter. And quite frankly, when I was at the Qubit conference a few weeks ago up in Boston, there were lots and lots of interesting, compelling demonstrations comparing quantum computing optimization processes with classical counterparts on real world applications that could demonstrate numbers that people could understand. This ran 3 times faster. This produced results that were 10% more efficient. Those are the kinds of compelling stories that end users want to hear, not the improvements on T1 or T2 times, gate fidelity increases to 3 nines and such. Those things are interesting within the quantum computing development community. I don't think there is an important role to play here as demonstrated end use performance that the C-suite can understand and start to write checks for. And that is the end of the CAN presentation. I hope we have some questions and answers going forward. This is my email address if you want to challenge any of my assumptions, ask any more in-depth questions. But as Susan mentioned at the start of this, the deck is available through the D-Wave infrastructure, or if you want, you can just drop me a line as well. Otherwise, I want to thank everyone for sticking around, at least for the presentation, and I hope everybody has a good day. And Susan, do we have questions that we can address?
We do. And actually, before we get to some of the specific questions, there were some questions, and one of the overall questions I'd like you to address is, so we've done, I don't know, 3 or maybe 4 surveys of enterprises over the last 3 or 4 years. What have been some of the biggest changes you've seen over that time? Even though the questions weren't necessarily exactly the same, but what stands out for you?
I think if it's anything, it's pragmatism. Users in the early days, and I mentioned the early adopter attitude. In the early days, I think people were looking at quantum as a solution, but something that was more of a technological exploration than it was driving down into practical business gains. And I think that what I've seen over the years is a movement away from let's look at this technology because it's interesting, compelling, and it has a future, to let's move to this technology because we can now justify measurable performance gains and start to think about return on investment, making risk calculations. How much do we have to pay versus how much do we get out of that investment? And so I think that's, if anything, end users have taken on board the time frame, the expected, supply chain of quantum computing, and have a much more realistic perspective on what it brings to the table today, what's perhaps in the near future, and what's perhaps in the distant future. So in some sense, I talk about lack of in-house expertise, but what I've seen over the years is, I think, a much more sophisticated perspective of how the technology is advancing with respect to some of these critical end uses that these enterprise and HPC users are most interested in.
Great. One other question before we get to the specific questions. And this has to do with kind of your consulting and all the conversations you have with enterprises. But where does energy consumption fall in kind of one of the benefits that people see in quantum computing or not?
Well, thanks for bringing that up, because this is one of my great unexplored secrets of quantum computing. The bottom line is, you cannot talk to an HPC user today who isn't concerned about power consumption. The idea that an NVIDIA GPU, for example, is pushing 1 kilowatt, that systems are now at the highest end of performance are pushing 25 or 30, or in some cases 50 megawatts of power. So all of the traditional HPC world right now is looking for ways to drive efficiency, lower cost of power consumption without sacrificing too much performance. Quantum computing, interestingly enough, in some sense, it's fascinating to go see a quantum computer on the floor. And if you do, the first thing you need to do when you get there is run around the back and take a look and see how much power is going into this thing. And what you'll see is it's terribly, terribly unimpressive from a consumer perspective. Quantum computers generally operate at 3 or 4 orders of magnitude less, in some sense, than a similar sized classical computer. And what that means is that if quantum computing in and of itself can only perform as well as a classical counterpart, the power savings alone in some sense, justifies the purchase of that system. From an energy saving perspective, a quantum computing system operating at 3 or 4 orders of magnitude lower power pays for itself in energy cost within a very short period of time. And so anything right now that offers a significant potential improvement in the power envelope of both advanced computing sites as well as enterprise sites, to me, is a clear winner. And so the confluence of quantum's promise and performance gains at significantly reduced power levels is a great unappreciated combination of forces going forward. And like I said, I'd encourage people to run around the back of every quantum computer you see, and you'll just go, that's it, that's the plug, that's what makes it work, compared to what you're going to see in a classical compute capability. And in some cases, that classical compute capability can't even compete on a performance level with a quantum counterpart, or will have trouble competing, I should say, going forward increasingly. And the interesting part about that is that quantum computing power consumption doesn't scale all that dramatically. In other words, as qubit counts go up, as performance capabilities increase, you don't get a doubling or an exponential growth in power. It scales rather simply. And in some cases, because the actual quantum computing processor is really only a small consumer of energy, the system will actually probably not require significant increases in power, even as qubit counts increase from their current levels to anticipated qubit counts going forward for at least the next decade. Lots of opportunity there from a power perspective that I think more people should be generally aware of and make that part of their overall calculation when it comes to what does quantum bring to the table.
Okay, great. So a few questions we have a few minutes of time for. There were some questions about ROI in terms of this was kind of ROI expectations and in terms of what you've actually seen in the market. I would just kind of mention for everybody, Bob's mentioned qubits a few times. That's the annual D-Wave Quantum Computing Conference. And we did have customers running quantum in production who talked about that. And all of the recordings of all of those sessions are on the D-Wave YouTube channel, so you can take a look there. But kind of a comment on that, Bob, plus a question about is the expected ROI, does it differ between mature quantum adopters, those already running R&D or implementation, and others yet to embark on such activities?
It's funny, we did not do that. We didn't cross-cut it that way. That would be an interesting way to go forward. Again, when I deal with the quantum issue, to me, production level carries with it, in some sense, a somewhat different definition than it does in terms of what you expect in a production environment in a typical HPC or enterprise community. So to me, production in some sense, when we've talked to folks about this in the sector, production to them may be we run a quantum job on a cloud service system, maybe an hour a day or 2 hours a day, or some as needed process, as opposed to the more traditional classical compute capability, where a production job means you dedicate systems, large resources computationally, to running a small number of jobs or some jobs on a 24/7 world. So I think what we have to do is dig a little deeper into what production level definitions are. And I'm sure that as quantum computing technology matures and use cases become more prevalent and more demonstrably financially successful, we're going to see more traditional production where people are going to be using that quantum system 24/7 for a select number of really high performance jobs that are critical to business processes. So right now, we really didn't look too deeply into the ROI expectations for production versus the other stuff. But it's something I think we're going to ask that next time around if we get the opportunity, because it is really a good question.
Okay, another question. There have been several comments made about organizations struggling to find expertise or hire those with the right skill sets. Do you have any idea where organizations are successfully finding talent or how workforce training programs may be improved?
I think what's happening, and this is kind of the good news, is the quantum computing software stack is really maturing to the sense that no one needs to hire a PhD in quantum physics to write code anymore. There are now software developer kits. There are basically Python kinds of activities. I think I took a D-Wave class a few years ago on how to write code for the D-Wave system, And even I managed to write some code successfully, despite the fact that I still only type with 2 fingers. So the software stack is going to help alleviate some of those concerns, as the ability to disaggregate the quantum technology from the software requirements will become more sophisticated. The other thing, of course, is I think we're going to see the emergence of more turnkey applications that you don't, for example, if someone's running a computational fluid dynamics design program in the automotive sector, they are looking at a model of a car. They're looking at a model of a structural member or something like that. They're not getting involved too deeply in the actual physics and modeling mechanics of that capability. And I think what we're going to see more in the quantum computing sector reflects that kind of methodology. The idea that applications, vertical specific, sector specific, that don't require anyone but the subject matter expert at hand to, as I said in some other cases, to just basically run a job, point and click. And they may not even know how much of it's going to quantum. They may not know how much of it's going to the classical world. All they know is they're getting results back faster. And I think we're going to see that in the business process world as well. The idea that application specific developments will continue to become more sophisticated, alleviating some of the requirements for end users and even the IT department to make quantum that much different than yet just another accelerator that sits downstairs in the IT room or sits over in Ashburn, Virginia, in a cloud service facility to work. So I think it's going to take a little bit of time, but that to me is one of the greatest drivers in all this. It's the maturing software ecosystem that means you don't have to require experts as much as you used to. All you have to do is make the right decisions about which software you want to use, who's the vendor that supplies it, and that will be much more of a load and go environment than what we saw in the past, and what's becoming, I think, less and less popular or prevalent in the sector as we move forward.
Okay, I think we have time for 2 last questions. One had to do with using kind of the current telecommunications infrastructure to access these systems. Was there concern about it? And certainly the events of last Friday played into that question.
I mean, the bottom line here is right now the cloud service model is really king, and because there are a lot of organizations, they want to try different vendors. They want different pay-as-you-go models or other ways to budget thing out, and they want to try different cloud service providers. It's interesting that you can go to a CSP and maybe kick the tires on a number of different quantum computing suppliers. Now, one of the main concerns with the internet infrastructure is for organizations that are looking at tightly integrated quantum classical hybrid algorithms, where you have an iterative process that cycles back and forth between the quantum computer and the classical computer, and suddenly the time of flight delays in internets becomes a significant portion of the overall runtime of the job. That we're not going to see in the business process world as of yet. And the other thing, of course, is that the data transfer rates for quantum, you don't load gigabytes or terabytes or petabytes of data into a quantum computer to run a job. So we don't see a huge, onerous, high bandwidth, low latency requirement in the quantum computing realm, at least not yet. That may change over time as new applications come about, new capabilities come about in the quantum computing space. But right now, it's not a concern. To me, the biggest concern right now is making sure that CloudStrike doesn't release updates that they haven't really tested more than anything else.
Okay, and our final question. So do you think learning quantum computing development now would be a good idea?
There's so many ways to learn about the development. If you're interested in kicking the tire on the technology, hold it, let me jump up really quick. Here it is. I'm sorry, I wasn't prepared for that. The 2 things I'd look at is the first one is What You Should Know About Quantum Computers by Chris Farrell. This is a really interesting book. It'll kind of blow up some myths. It's an interesting way to do business. And the other one, oddly enough, is Quantum Computing for Dummies, written by Worley, who is the CEO of StrangeWorks. This has a little less technology, a little more business sense to it. What does it take from a business perspective? And so the bottom line is start reading, start understanding that there's a lot of mythology around quantum that is irrelevant to an end user. And the answer I always like to give is not many enterprise IT guys know how an MOS transistor work. They don't know exactly how what NVIDIA does with 80 billion transistors on a chip, but they know an awful lot about how to use it. And I think that's the key to understanding quantum, is finding your place in the entire ecosystem to understand where you need to understand the most, and don't get too involved in other portions of the software stack, because quantum is an interesting, very complex, very confusing. I've been looking at it for the last almost decade now. I'm still not getting it completely. So choose wisely where you go. If you want the names of those books, drop me an email and I'll pump it out.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for coming today. Again, we've recorded this. We'll send out the link to the recording in the next few days, along with the link to the slides. The report that Bob created out of this is also available on the D-Wave website, so take a look there. I had put the link in the chat some time ago. So Bob, thank you so much. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, Susan. Thanks for sponsoring this and setting this all up, and thanks to all the participants that showed up and hung around. And hopefully we'll see you at the next Qubit conference.